right, tonight we're going to have this is a wee bio of Robbie Burns. Unfortunately, we don't have enough time in this program to really give credence to his life and his legacy, but hopefully this little short vignette will help give you a little bit of info about his life and some of his works. Robert Burns was a complex man, as most great poets are far from average. Alfred Lord Byron summed up the complexity of Burns particularly well. Tenderness, roughness, delicacy, coarseness, sentiment, sensuality, soaring and groveling, dirt and deity, all mixed up in that one compound of inspired clay. Back in his day, you gotta look at Robert Burns as kind of like a rock star. I guess the best combination I came up with was a mixture of Mick Jagger, John Lennon, Kurt Cobain, and the rapper Drake.
Nice.
Their influence was Burns was so much that Abraham Lincoln had his poetry memorized. There are more statues, monuments, and memorials dedicated to Robert Burns than any other non-religious figure after Queen Victoria and Christopher Columbus. Burns was the first person ever to be featured on a commemorative bottle of Coca-Cola, and it's claimed that Michael Jackson's smash hit Thriller was inspired by the poem Tam O'Shanter by Robert Burns. Robbie was born in South Ayrshire, Scotland, west coast of Scotland, January 25th, 1759. He didn't have a formal education outside what you might have learned in school, like rhetoric, grammar, a little bit of logic. He picked up French, a little bit of Latin in his older years, and he also was introduced to classical poets and Shakespeare and such. But there's one writer to say Burns was so well versed in nature's book of writing, and he also had a keen sense into the insight of the complex scroll called human nature. As you see in the slide here, Robbie never forgot his home in the Highlands. He loved the land and loved being out in the countryside, and its influence can be found throughout all his works. And if you're a nature lover, you can just Google a deep dive in the poetry of Robert Burns about nature. You can find something about any season, any plants, or anything you like. Ultimately, for financial and professional reasons, Burns was drawn to the big city where he was exposed to and robustly embraced Scottish nationalism, probably a few women, and probably a lot more bottles than that.
Yes, sir.
This next slide here is a picture of his copy of one of his collections of poetry, known as the Kilmarnock volume. It's one of the most important literary tasks he began. He did it out of love. He didn't get paid for it. And this was for the Scots Musical Museum. Burns contributed over 300 songs, many of his own composition, and other based on older verses, and a legendary song from Annandale that's been bandied about once in a while. At this time, he wrote in just one day his most famous long poem, Tam O'Shanter. A little bit about Tam O'Shanter. Tam O'Shanter is a story of a man who disturbs a coven of witches in the kirk at Alloway and has to flee for his life on Meg, his old grey mare. The fastest witch, Cutty Sark means short petticoat in the old Scots language, nearly catches him by the River Doon. But the running water makes her powerless, and though she manages to grasp Meg's tail, Tam escapes over the bridge. If you take a close look at Washington Irving's The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, you'll see in it the bones of Tam O'Shanter, which was written only a couple generations before. Burns died at the age 39 of rheumatic fever, which he contracted after falling asleep at the roadside, after a particular vigorous drinking session in the pouring rain. And this is kind of little like going a couple slides ahead, but I snuck it in here. The last of Burns' children, Maxwell, was actually born during his funeral service. More about that in a few slides.
Brilliant young man.
Yeah.
Brilliant young.
He really embraced it, didn't he?
Many women.
After the death of his father in 1784, Burns inherited the farm, but by 1786, he was, and let's just say, some difficulties. The farm was not successful, and he made 2 women pregnant. This will kind of talk about next slide. We'll talk about this in the next slide, but it goes up here again. Burns decided to emigrate to Jamaica so to raise money required for this journey. He published his poems in the Scottish dialect in 1786, which was an immediate success. He was persuaded not to leave Scotland by Dr. Thomas Blaylock, and in 1787, an Edinburgh edition of the poems was published. So he's starting to get some traction in his life here. He's publishing the poetry. He married Jane Armour in 1788. She had been one of his many women during his early life. As the kids say, he has a high body count. A very forgiving wife, she accepted and took responsibility for all of Burns' children, legitimate and illegitimate alike. Again, like the kids say, he must be some sort of Chad or something here. His eldest child, the first of 3 illegitimate daughters, all called Elizabeth, was greeted with the poem, "Welcome to a Bastard Wean." A farm was bought in Elsland on the banks of the River Knife near Dumfries. But unfortunately, the farm did not prosper, and Burns ceased farming in 1791 and became a full-time exciseman. A problem soon arose as a steady income from his employment gave him ample opportunity to continue with the drink, which has long been his weakness, which unfortunately many men of genius throughout all generations of writing always had a vice for the bottle. And unfortunately, old Robbie was one of them. As I said earlier, he died of rheumatic fever at 37 years old after he fell asleep on the roadside. Probably got too drunk, got sick, and died. And this picture here is a picture of his funeral. Over 10,000 Scots attended Burns' funeral on July 21st, 1796. Jean, his wife, was financially well taken care of by some of Burns' most ardent supporters. And it's been noted by keen observers of that day, maybe you can see that painting there, that there seems a disproportionate number of grieving women lining the funeral route. Again, I don't know if that's in the 10s or 50s of women, but you know. And also in there, it's thought there was many sad barmen as well. And if you owed them money like you did that haberdasher before his last days, they probably wanted that money. You know, he's dead. Where are they going to get it from? So he's gone. Now let's look a little bit at Burns as a Freemason. The real reason why we're here. Most certainly, Burns' commitment to the ideals of the Enlightenment came from his membership in the Masonic Lodge, much praised and damned for its equity, both in political and religious matters among its members. Besides these lofty ideals, the Lodge also appealed to Burns for other reasons: the camaraderie and spirit of brotherhood that prevailed in the lodge room and the charity towards the widows and the orphans. And many writers have felt that Burns also found this as a place of refuge from his internal demons and his womanizing issues. They found some solace in the halls of Freemasonry. According to the author William L. Fox, Burns found in the experience of being a Freemason something unlike the political and religious institutions that kept his father in a state of perpetual frustration. In Burns' day, if he got caught sinning, he'd be put on the cutty stool in front of the whole church and he read the riot act from the pastor. And come into the lodge where we don't discuss religion and we welcome all brothers in on the level, that was a place of peace for him. For Burns, Freemasonry was one of the cures for his society's numerous social ills. Oops, gotta go back. There we go. Let's go through his experience here as a Mason. Robert Burns was initiated as an entered apprentice in Lodge St. David, Bolton, on the 4th of July, 1781, at the age of 23. Burns was passed in the degree of fellowcraft and eventually raised to the degree of Master Mason on 1st October, 1781. Burns went with the Lodge St. James, and on the 27th of July, 1784, he was elected Depute Master of the Lodge at the ripe young age of 25. Sir John Whiteford was the worshipful master of the Lodge, but it was somewhat of an honorary position, as the Depute Master in reality was in charge. Burns was faithful to the Lodge, attending regularly, and 3 sets of minutes were in his own handwriting. 29 sets of minutes were signed by him. Now we're going to go back to that little story we told you about, that he wanted to go and get out of Scotland and make some money on the farming. So he gave a poem, A Farewell to the Brethren of St. James Lodge, Bolton. He recited it on the night of the 23rd of June at the state meeting of the lodge. And he thought he was going to go away to the West Indies and make his fortune, pay off some debts, and probably support the kids that he was trying to run away from. However, Burns decided to stay in Scotland when in July 1786, his Kilmarnock edition of the poems was published by a brother Freemason, and 350 brethren of St. John's Lodge, Kilmarnock, subscribed to a copy, setting it on a course to sell many more. In October, he was made honorary member of Lodge Kilmarnock, Kilwinning, St. John. And to finish up here, Freemasonry's influence on Burns' poetry is quite visible. Like I said, if you can read a lot of poetry and you see the masonry in there, it's really beautiful. Beside the works which specifically deal with the craft, a number of poems have a strong dose of Masonic philosophy and idealism. Freemasonry not only spoke out the ideals of liberty, fraternity, equality, but also were responsible for the creation of nationalistic feelings and fervor, as a number of Freemasons played prominent roles in both the American and French revolutions. While Freemasonry did not produce the same kind of feelings in Scotland, it did help mobilize the cultural nationalism of Scotland and generating a sense of national identity by supporting literary figures such as Burns. There is no doubt that Burns had a rough life. Burns found no comfort for his woes in church or society. Like many writers, he was a conflicted man. Lots of genius, a lot of turmoil. But yet, Freemasonry remained one of the most important aspects of his life. Even during the time when all others had abandoned and condemned him, the Lodge still welcomed him as a brother and never forgot that. And that's the beautiful way of looking at his life and how this fraternity helped such a genius writer like him go through some tough times, produce some of the most beautiful literature of our last 200 years. And with that, all set.
Thanks, Rob. Awesome. That was great.